All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session. Thank you for coming this early in the morning. At least there was no party yesterday night, so we should be all awakened. My name is Ciro Continisio, and I'm a technical evangelist at Unity. I come from Brighton. I came here this week to talk to you about timeline, and specifically of scripting the timeline. I'm going to do a risky thing. How many of you have used the timeline? OK. How many of you have scripted timeline? You see? So let's talk about that. But first, I want to, what to expect from this talk. So I'm going to give a brief intro to timeline for the ones who have never seen it. It's always good to recap. Then I'm going to show you how to create custom tracks. And then I'm going to give you, without spoilers, some examples of creative uses of timeline. And then I'm going to give you some final tips. And I can say with certainty that if you have a code allergy, don't worry. Non-coders can stay. There's going to be stuff for you as well. I'm going to show you some interesting things. So without further ado, timeline. It was introduced in 2017.1, and it looks more or less like that. This is, of course, the bright skin. So it looks like Premiere, After Effects, Final Cut, iMovie, if you fancy that. It's a timeline, and it allows you to sequence things. It allows you to sequence animations, camera shots, audio, and more, right? So, I got ahead of myself. So you can sequence all these things. You can also sequence other timelines. So you can kind of embed a timeline inside the other, and they will play together. And you can sequence more, and I'm going to show you what. So when I saw timeline for the first time, I thought, because I'm a game designer, right? So I like movies, but I like games more. And I was thinking, is timeline just a linear sequencing tool? Can I just play a timeline from A to B, and that's it? Is it just like a cutscene? So I interrupt gameplay, I play the cutscene, and then I resume gameplay? And I embarked on this quest, and I created a little RTS game for this demo to try and see what I could use timeline for in a creative way. So, and I found out that with timeline can do so much more with scripting. So let me give an introduction to timeline first. When you start creating a timeline, you usually want to start with an asset. So there's an asset that you create in the editor. It's called the timeline asset, and it's a playable. So remember this word playable, because I'm going to go back to it several times. And once you create this asset in the project window, then you can bring it to the hierarchy or to the scene. You create a new game object, and you feed the asset inside this component that is called playable director. So the playable director will play the asset, right? Will play the timeline. And then you can start creating your timeline. So you can start adding tracks. And when you add tracks, the tracks look like this. So you have a header of the track on the left side, which contains the binding. The binding is the object that the track is going to control. So each track, not all of them, but most tracks control one object. And the object goes inside the binding. And then on the right side, you have clips. You can have as many clips as you want. You can create them, destroy them, move them back and forth. And you can, if you overlap them, you blend them together, and you get a blend. So the blends look like this. They look like an oblique line that is telling you that in there, there's two clips, or more, actually, blending together. So let's go. Yeah, and then you can also create custom clips. So you see these clips here. We can create our own custom clips, and they usually require two scripts. One is called the clip script, and one is called the behavior script. I'm going to go into more detail about this later on. But they work together to define the logic of the clips. So let me show you in the editor an example. So here I have the game that I made. Right? I'm going to full window and just give you a small example. So as you can see, it's kind of like an RTS, a very simple RTS game. I have some units. I can select them, right-click to move them. They move as like a formation, and they go into a circle. So there's some kind of AI there going on. I'm sending the units there, and then the AI calculates the path using the NavMesh agent. I can go back and forth with the camera. This is all Cinemachine stuff, although it's not the focus of this talk. And then I can attack these enemies, and they start fighting each other, killing each other, lots of violence. Typical video game stuff. Yeah, so they engage the nearby enemies and stuff like that. So I'm going to use this game as an example for a timeline. So just to give you a very quick example, how do I create a timeline? The things I said before. So I just go in here in the project folder. I do create timeline. I can give it a name. I'm going to call it Unite Austin Demo. And now I can bring this object to the hierarchy. A game object is created. And as you can see, there's the playable director component, as I said before, and it's the asset is in the component, and it's going to be played. So once I created this object, I can go to the timeline window here. I can usually lock it because it's good practice, so it doesn't lose focus. And then I can start adding tracks. So I can add any kind of track. So for example, let me animate a character really quick. If I bring this character to the scene, it's going to be here. It's a little character. He has a bunch of things. And here you see he has an animator. And the animator has an animator controller. So the character, once the game is played, will be controlled by that controller. But if I animate it with timeline, timeline takes over. So if I go back to the timeline and I add an animation track, I can then bind this character into the track and then add clips. So I can add animation clips, and I can add the medium idle spear. And as you can see now, I'm already controlling the guy with the timeline. I can add more tracks. I can add a run spear track. And you see, sorry, a clip. And you see the clip is sequenced just after that. So I have an idle, and I have a run. So timeline is taking control over the animator, and it's feeding its own animations into the animator. And now, once I've done this, as I said before, I can blend them. So if I don't blend them, that's what I see. I see like a jump in the animation. You see here, there's a jump. If I just squash them together, then I can blend from one to the other, and they blend seamlessly. This is what, like, arguably one of the most cool features of timeline. And I can keep going like this, right? I can have another idle and blend it again, and blend from like idle to run and to idle again. I can even like sequence, different speeds. Anyway, this is just a quick example. So as I said before, we can sequence animations, we can sequence audio, we can sequence video as well, and other timelines. And then we can create our custom things. So if I use this playable track, and you see playable is the thing I mentioned before, this track here, which is already in Unity by default, allows us to put custom clips. And custom clips, as I mentioned, they require two scripts, right? Clip and behavior. So if I go back here, now I have these two scripts already created. They're here. And I'm just going to show you one of them. As I said, if you're non-programmers, don't run away. Also, I should have opened MonoDevelop before. But the idea is two scripts. One is the data, and one is the logic. And if you see here in MonoDevelop, I have this process frame, which reminds a lot of the update function. So with this script, I have a function that gets called every frame. And in here, I can put my custom logic. And in this case, I'm just putting like a debug.log. So I'm just going to print a message. You see here, there's a public string variable. So back to Unity, if I go to the timeline, I can now create my simple clips and just put them on this track, this generic playable track. And if I create a clip, as you can see here, I have the message. And I'm going to say, ciao, Austin, because I'm Italian. And if I duplicate this clip, I can have another one. And I can say, how's it going? Did I type it correctly? How's it going? Once I have these clips, as you can see, timeline is already executing. You see here at the bottom in the messages, but if I go to the console, you can see it's already being executed. So the scripts are working. So I have now these custom clips, and as I play through the timeline, they're going to output something here at the bottom. And look at this. I can't blend them because I haven't defined what they do when they blend. I'm going to talk about blending in a second. So these clips are just very simple. They just do one thing. Pretty useless as well. But this is like the way to start if you want to create your own custom clips. So you already have a track that accepts them. You put the clips on the track, and they work. But we want to do more. So let me actually close MonoDevelop because I don't think I need it anymore. So what if we want to create actually custom tracks? Because we use the default track in our clips, but I want to create a custom track. So custom tracks require a little bit more scripting. First, they require a track script, and then they require the clip and the behavior, like before, right? Data and logic of the clips. And then optionally, we can also add more scripts. And here you see the mixer behavior. So if we want to blend two clips together, we need an extra script that will define what happens when the clips blend. So if you need blending, you need the script number 4, mixer behavior. And then if you want to customize how the clips appear in the inspector, you can add another script, the custom inspector. But again, the last two are optional. You only need the first 3. So if we go back to the tracks and we try to connect these scripts to the graphical representation, we could say that the first script, the track 1, defines the binding and defines also, you see the little blue bar, the color? That's also defined in the track script. So the first script defines the header of the track, and then the second and third script work together, and they define how the clips work. So one holds the data, and the other one holds the logic. So each clip, if you can imagine that it's being powered by these 2 scripts together. And then the fourth script, the optional one, defines the blending. So when I have a blending, I need that script, and that script looks over to all the clips and blends them together. And then the 5th one that I mentioned is the custom inspector, right? So let's see it in the editor. I created a little example. Let me nuke this guy. I'm going to show you what the example does first. So I have a simple like cutscene, camera movements, camera cut. You lower the volume just a little bit. Camera cut, and now in front of the character I have some text. And as you can see, the timeline is waiting for me to interact with it. So I can press spacebar, and then he talks again, and then the timeline waits again. And I can press spacebar, and she talks back, and the timeline waits, and then I press spacebar, and I have another dolly. I think it's called a dolly. And we look into the sky, and we see there's a monster there, but they haven't noticed it. And now cut to the monster camera, you know. It's a very simple example. So what's the key here? The timeline is linear, but it has pauses. And you might say, that's not so exceptional, right? The thing that I want to show you here, I'm going to show you the timeline, is, so this is the timeline that we're looking at. Let me zoom in a little bit. So as you can see here, I have a bunch of camera shots here on the Cinemachine track that creates the camera movement. Then I have the soundtrack. And then I have this, the dialogue. So the dialogue track is my own custom track. I wrote this track, and I basically did one very simple thing. The clip is just sending text to the dialogue box, and then it's pausing the timeline. If I tick this checkbox, has to pause, it pauses the timeline. And again, you might say, like, what's so special about it? Well, the special thing about it is that if I want to change my timeline, I can just move these clips back and forth. I don't need to go into an external script and change the numeric values of a float and then make sure that they line up and then go in here, try the timeline again. So the big advantage here of creating this custom track is being able to do everything on the timeline. And the even bigger advantage is that if you're a programmer and you code all these things, then you can give it to anyone who's not a programmer, and they can create endless cutscenes, and they can create the dialogue, and they can pause the editor whenever they want, right? They just need to tick this box. And as you can see here, this clip here doesn't pause. This is just a scream. I don't care if people read it or not. So the text will go through here, not pause, and then go here and pause, right? And it's as simple as just clicking a box. Just to show you, this custom track is here in the scripts. It's called dialogue. And you see it has 3 clips: track, clip, and behavior. Track defines the binding. There's no binding here, actually. And clip and behavior define data and logic. There's no mixing, so I don't need the mixer behavior, right? In fact, if I go back to the timeline and I squash them, they don't mix. But I don't need that because I don't want to mix 2 dialogues. Although you could have that if you wanted. I don't. So yeah, simple timeline, and again, here at the bottom, there's just a few animations. So the core of this timeline is here in the dialogues, right? And I think this is cool enough, but we can do more. So this was still a linear timeline. We played from A to B, and we can only stop in the middle. What if we want a non-linear timeline? What if we want a timeline that goes back and forth, or goes back, or whatever? So I thought, what could I do? Well, my idea was the timeline is there, and then I have the game logic. I have my game. I have my RTS game, which has a game logic, some AI working in the background. So what I want to do here is from the timeline, I take some info from the game. I process that info in the timeline on the clips. And with that info, I produce an animation. In this case, is the wrapping of the timeline. So again, let's see it in the editor. Let me disable the black and white camera. Let me enable the storm timeline. So here you see I have some units on the battlefield. So this is gameplay, right? But as I press play, gameplay doesn't start immediately. As I press play, we see a little cutscene. So the camera goes above, and I can't select anything, and there's a storm. It starts raining. There's a raining particle effect, so I hope you can see it. And then there are some lightning flashes. And now I'm into the gameplay. And I can select my units, direct them around. I can move the camera. I can even go like down if I wanted. I will still see the rain and the lightning sparks. And there's some enemies there. And the key of this timeline is the storm will go on as long as they're alive. So I need to kill them for the storm to finish. So if I right-click, and I hope my men will win, my women, actually, these are girls. Yes, so they win, and shortly after, the storm ends. And, the light goes up again, there's less flashes, and the rain stops. And then I'm back into the gameplay, and it's like daytime. So how do I do this, and what's so special about it? I created a timeline. It's here. I call it storm timeline. Again, change of camera with Cinemachine. This is just a shot. You see if I move here, is this camera here. It has a little bit of noise because I want to show the storm coming, right? Then I go back to the gameplay at this point, and then I change again at the end. So you see here I have the intro, the middle part, which is gameplay, and the outro of the storm. Let me zoom this timeline as much as I can. Again, soundtrack track. Then I have something that defines when I can have the input. This is just an activation track. And then I have some lights. So you see there's a fading here. So the light goes down. Plus I have some flashes, which are these two yellow clips. Light is down, light is down, light is down, and then light goes up. And then in here, I have the rain, which is a particle system. I just keyframe the emission rate. So it starts raining more and more, and then it rains a lot, and then it fades back. So as you can see, there's an intro, a middle point, and that. So what I want to do here is play, 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 and then once I arrive here, if those guys are not dead, I want to wrap again here. And then the timeline keeps playing, and keeps playing all the time until I kill those guys, and then once I arrive here, this clip will check if those guys are dead, and if they're dead, it will let go and play the outro. So the timeline is non-linear now. The timeline wraps indefinitely until the player does something. So the game logic has some information. Timeline asks all the time, are they dead? Are they dead? Are they dead? So I call this track time machine track. And what I do is I have a clip which acts as a marker. Do you see the text? More or less. So this clip acts as a marker, and I called it after intro. And then this other clip, this one acts as a jump to marker. And it will jump to after intro if, and here I define conditions, so I can have always, never, or if this platoon is alive. Which platoon? I connect it here, and I'm connecting basically the platoon of monsters, which are just these two defenseless guys. And so the timeline, every time it arrives here, will check if they are alive, and if they are, it will jump here. And if they're not, it will just continue playback. And again, this is, you could say like, well, why don't I just make, more timelines, and then somebody creates a custom logic to sequence them together. I think it's really handy to have everything on one timeline, because you can test it all together. Because also these clips, they don't work if it's not in play. So here I can just see, what the storm does, and I can see the exit, and test the noise, and test the fade. So I can always, quickly test this thing without actually having to kill the monsters over and over again, which is arguably one of the worst things you can do. If you create some conditions that then make your game difficult to test for yourself, you're on the wrong path, right? So we want to be quick, reactive, and we want to give power to the artist, to the video editor, to whatever you want to call it, right? So again, this custom track allows me to blend back or even jump forward. Actually, we had a problem in the office. There was an art director that was editing a very long timeline, and he wanted to check like the timing of some sounds and some animation, and he was watching the timeline every single time, and he was watching like 25 seconds. It's not that much. But if you, in a day, if you watch it like 1,000 times, you wasted more than an hour. So I gave him this thing, and you just need to put a clip in here at the very beginning, like this, and you say, jump to time, 25, always, done. And then every time you play this timeline, when the playhead arrives here, it will jump to 25 seconds. Yeah, simple. So, but we want to do even more. I'm not happy with nonlinear timelines, because as I said, game designer, so I want to play with the gameplay. So I thought, okay, can I actually have timeline interact with the game systems? And by game system, this time I mean the AI of the game. So I have my timeline, and I have my game AI, and I made a custom track that controls the AI. It doesn't ask for information, it actually controls it. And by controlling the AI, it produces an animation. So the animation is not in the timeline, it's in the AI, and timeline just says, play this animation for me, please, because it's a kind timeline. So what's the key here? The game AI already has a lot of animations. It has a lot of logic that says if I send the character there, the character is going to find its path on the nav mesh, and then it's going to play a running animation, and once it arrives, it blends into an idle animation, and then if there's an enemy, it will attack the enemy and blend into another attack animation, and then stop and go into idle again. Why would I need to do all this work again if I want to sequence a little battle? Why don't I have the AI do it for me? So as you can see here, it's slightly different. Timeline controls the AI, and then the animation is produced by the AI, not by timeline. Let's see the example. So I'm going to enable this other timeline. It has a lot of units on the battlefield. These are enemies. These are the good guys. And then here I have 3 monsters and one, I call it the boy. Let me play. I think I can play. So you see, he tries to escape. The monsters are following. So he finds his path around, and he stops. He tries to fight back valiantly, but it's a useless effort. So now the town wants to fight back, and it sends all the warriors on the battleground. Attack! And the battle starts. And now they're fighting here in front of the gates. But there's more monsters coming from the hills. You see here, I'm not playing, I can control. And they fight, but the monsters are too many. And so it's the end of our mighty kingdom. Camera back, and I should have added some kind of the end text or credits, but I didn't. Anyway, so cutscene, but as you can see, I am using the AI. So if I go and select this cutscene, which is already selected here, this is what it looks like. Again, camera shots for the cinematic effect. So I have this camera shot here, this blending of 2 camera shots, and then the guys go to attack, and stuff like that. Soundtrack, again, input is disabled just by using an activation track, and then the core of this timeline is here. If I open this one, I get this custom track that I made. It's called AI command track. So this track allows me to create some clips, and these clips actually have AI commands. So I took all the things that the AI can do, and I made them available to this custom track. Go to and stay idle. Go to and guard for the enemy. Attack that target. Stop and even die. So I can just kill, like, it's a bit green, but anyway. So, for example, go to and idle and go to and guard, they have, as you can see, a target position. If I switch to attack target, which I shouldn't do because otherwise I will break this timeline, but it's here, it has a target. So I can just feed the unit that I want to attack. So here I have these tracks, and here you can really see the binding. So the binding here on the first track is binding the boy, and it's just saying go to and guard. So the boy will go to and guard in that position. And then the second one is this platoon of monsters, and they are going to attack the boy and then go in front of the gate, and so forth. So we have platoon big, which is the good guys. They're going to go to and guard in front of the gate, and then, these are the monsters, and then the defenders, they will do roughly the same thing. They will basically find themselves there and start fighting because of the AI. So basically with this thing, with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 clips, I've choreographed a little battle and the boy escaping and the drama of his death and stuff like that, without having to sequence one walking animation, right? So if we see it again, I'm actually gonna press play like this. So you see, they receive the command here, boy and monsters. They go there. Actually here I used a little trick, you see. I'm rewinding the timeline as long as he's alive. As soon as he dies, move forward, and now the monsters go there. The platoon of monsters moves, and now the guards move. They sprint forward, and now they're all there in the center, and they're basically just fighting, right? So with just these clips, I was able to choreograph all these characters. And this is, I'd say, incredibly useful. If you can have an army of 100 units, and if your game can run those 100 units during gameplay, then it can run them in a timeline, right? So it's just a matter of optimization. You know, and here if I want to change the times, I just select these clips and I can move them forward, and I'm done. No big effort. So the effort is on creating the custom track, and then it's all downhill. So we've seen some examples. To conclude, as we've seen, you can script timeline to create custom and non-linear playback, rewind, go back and forth. You can slow down or speed up the timeline if you wanted, or you can even reverse it. And then this is stuff that I haven't shown you. It's just to give you a taste of what can be done. And then you can also create clips dynamically. So you can have an empty timeline and create the clips. This is useful when you have some kind of outside data, right, that is coming into Unity. Maybe you're recording some motion capture, and you want to create clips of motion capture directly on the timeline. You can do that. Or you can do binding of objects at runtime. So all the objects that I binded, I drag them into the editor, into the track header, but you can do that at runtime. So you can have a timeline and then recycle it multiple times, and every time you bind a different unit, a different light, a different camera. Or you can export tracks or clip data to files. Maybe you want to sequence your things in Unity, but you need to use them somewhere else. I heard of an example of people that are making events, and they want to sequence lights, they want to sequence videos on big screens. So they have a long timeline technology that they made, but they wanted to move to Unity and use Unity to sequence things, and then output everything to a text file, and just use it with their own technology, right? So you can export tracks and clip data to files. And you can do more. This is up to you. I've given you like a taste, and now it's up to you to imagine what else you can do with timeline. I think, what time is it? 45. I actually want to show you one last thing before we move to the closing. Some of these things rely on Unity being in play mode. So a thing such as the nav mesh agent is not available in edit mode. if I am scrubbing through the timeline like this, I'm not going to see the agents moving around because they're not active. So what did I do? Because I'm smart, right? I'm not stupid. I created a way to preview the AI in edit mode. You see how the characters move? They're not using the navmesh agent, they're using just a linear tweening. So this clip here is saying to the boy, go to and guard. And at this point, it should be there. So what I've done is I've created in the code for the clips 2 ways. One, if it's in play mode, and just use the AI. And the other one, if it's not in play mode, then I just tween the position from here, you see here the boy, to his final position. And even if this is an approximation, because in play mode, it might take more time, or he might die on the path for some reason. This at least gives me some feedback of what I'm doing. So am I doing the right thing? Because I don't want to, I don't want to play every time to see what I'm doing. So this approximation in edit mode at least gives me some guidance. And if I think that he's not moving in the right place, I can just select this clip and move this target. And then, it will move to the other place. Disregard the fact that he's not going to the target is because he's taking like a formation. He's supposedly on a circle. But you can see it with the monsters. So the monsters are supposed to go here. You see this gizmo. And at the end of this clip, they will be there in formation. Right? So I have a rough idea of where they will be. And then every now and then, I can press play and check if the AI is actually doing what I expect it to do. But if you build a deterministic AI, then you will always see the same result. And so scripting timelines sometimes can be a little bit difficult, especially if you're just getting started. So to get started, there is this thing on the asset store that a guy from the Brighton office has made, James. Thank you, James, if you're seeing this video. He made this asset, which is both some default custom tracks that you can look into and customize. And it also comes with a wizard thingy, which is here. And I used it to create with these tracks. So if I open the wizard, it looks like this. And it allows you to just give a name and say, like, I want a standard track. I want to control a light component. And then of this light component, I want to do the intensity. And I want to do the color, right? And I want the track to have this color here. And if I give it a name also, once I hit create, this will create for me the 4 scripts that I need, including the blending one. So for example, I'm using this one on the storm timeline here when I control the lights. I'm using it here. So these are just clips. And as you can see, they control color and intensity. And then I blend them together just by crushing them one into the other. And I can then have this blending up and down, right? So this wizard will get you started. Of course, it's free because it's made by Unity. So we'll get you started with scripting the timeline. Because you will be able to create your tracks, maybe use them as they are, or just go in and customize them even further. So this is all. Thank you for listening. If you have questions about timeline, about scripting for timeline. Oh, thank you.
Just real quick, can you go a little bit further into how do you made the loop work? So it's like keeps looping until the.
You want to see the code?
Yes.
Are you ready for this?
I am. Yes. How many lines? How many lines? 4?
It's a bit more than 4. No, I'm just saying because it's always difficult to show code in a live presentation. I mean, I'm not live coding. Also, don't judge the fact that I'm using MonoDevelop. If anyone wants to judge, that's the door. So the loop, what's the loop? Time machine. You ready for this? Time machine mixer behavior. So on time machine, what I'm doing is in the track. Oh, sorry, I need to zoom the code, not the screen. Can you read? So in the track, at the beginning, I'm doing a for each on all the clips. And basically, well, the first thing I do, I change the name of the clip. So basically, I create, you see, if I have a clip that is a marker, it has a dot, and this one has a little return arrow. I'm just using like ASCII characters. And if it's a pause, the one I used in the dialogue, it has 2 pipes. That's a little trick to just give more feedback to whoever is creating the timeline. And then the other thing I'm doing is, if the clip is marked as marker, then I add this marker to a dictionary. And so when the timeline is playing, in the mixer behavior, you remember the logic of the mixing? The mixer behavior has the process frame update function. So it scans all the clips. And if it finds a clip that is like go to marker, then it finds the marker, you see jump to time or jump to marker. If it's jump to time, it just sends the playable director to that specific time. Or if it's a marker, then it searches into the dictionary, finds the time, and then jumps to that time. So it's basically scan. This action here that I said here, when you get the clips, it happens at the beginning. As I press play, timeline basically scans all the clips and creates the playable. And at that point, it creates also the dictionary of labels, of markers. And then as it's playing, it looks into the clips and it goes like, are you returned to, yes. So where are you trying to go? Here. And he goes like, okay, that's the time. And sends the timeline to that specific time. And for the conditional one, where did I put it? Somewhere. I don't remember. It's somewhere, but it's in the time machine clip. The behavior, I created this condition met. And so condition always returns always true, condition never returns always false, and condition platoon is alive, goes to the binding of the track and uses a function that the platoon has, which always returns if they're all dead or not. So it asks the AI part of the game and says like, is anybody alive? Yes, no, and then depending on that, it creates these, you see platoon is alive. It creates these split, it creates this conditional playback. It's a bit of a complicated, I mean, of course, if you just want to twin a light is one thing, and if you want to play with the AI and all these things, then it requires a little bit more scripting. Anyway, I want to make this project available and possibly write some how-to and how to read also these things that I made and comment the code a little bit more. So that might be a guidance on how to do these things, and then you can expand on that. Hi.
Hi, great talk. I have a general timeline question. One thing I haven't found out how to do in the editor yet, and this is probably pilot error on my part. If you have a clip that's doing like a tweening or a transform, let's say you're changing light levels or moving or rotating a game object with tracks, I've got that working fine, but a lot of times you might want to have a clip that's right after the clip that you just did that returns the object to its original position rotation or whatever other things you're controlling simply by reversing the clip that was before. Is there a way in the editor, or would that be possible to make, I've done some editor scripts in the past. Can I make an editor script that takes a currently selected track, clones it, and reverses it for transform tracks? Or is that already possible in the editor somehow?
By transform track, you mean something like, what is it? An animation track that uses this kind of stuff, like keys.
Yeah, keyframe track. And I've got some curves in there that I carefully placed and so forth. I'd like to just have those curves be able to be flipped and make a new clip that's the exact same set of curves but reversed in time.
I'm not sure, because I've played with these normal animation tracks. I haven't played with these ones. I assume you can, or, I mean, if it's a matter of simple positions, then you can read the position before the clip is executed, store it somewhere, and just restore it as the clip is finished. I assume you can also play it back. I mean, you can also read what the clip is doing and store that, and then play it reversed. Yeah, I assume you can do that. I've never tried, though. I have
It
to be
just
honest.
seemed like a useful function in the editor to be able to say duplicate the current clip and then have another function that says take the current clip and reverse it.
I mean, the thing that we're missing, to be honest, is if I select this clip, this animation clip, I have a speed multiplier, and I think it doesn't play reverse. So if I go back to this simple
Yeah, I
one-
tried using a negative number for the speed
doesn't work,
multiplier,
right?
and that didn't, it wouldn't take anything.
Yeah, I
below
think
0.
that's the missing thing, and that's maybe what we want to have. Because that will also solve your specific
Yes,
case.
That would be a more general solution to what I proposed. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Sorry. Hi.
I was wondering if you could go into a little more detail about how you would generate a timeline clip dynamically, like what the process is for just kind of doing that in a generic case.
Not sure if I have the time. I mean, I will need to script it here.
Oh, okay.
But I mean, the idea is, yeah, it's a bit complicated to do it now. Maybe we can talk about it later, like outside.
Yeah, I'll just grab you after the talk.
Okay, cool.
All right, thanks.
Thanks.
Hi.
Hi. Oh,
Okay. Can I have different timelines for the same director? Like I have a door, and I use a timeline to open this door, and in-game change the timeline in director to close the door. Can I have the same binding of the game object?
I mean, timeline is an asset, right? So if you see here, I have the timelines here in the project.
Yes.
For example, this one, which is the one that I use at the beginning with this little character. You see here, there's no binding. So the timeline in the project doesn't have the binding. When I put it in the scene, that's where the binding happens. So if I select this one, the game object, you see the binding appears.
Yes.
So the timeline only binds to objects in the scene when it's in the scene. So in your case, what you said is basically you should have two timelines, two game objects with two timelines, and they're already pre-bound to the door.
It's the one director, which the same binding.
You want to use the same director.
Yes, for the same binding.
Because if you're using because if you're using the same director, then you see it's like here I have this director, and then I feed another timeline in, and that's where you need to do the binding via code. Okay. So you need to rebind the door because the timeline asset is coming from the project. You inject it in here in the playable director, and at that point it has no bindings because it doesn't know. He's new to the scene, so you have to via code rebind the door to the specific animation track, and then it will work. It's just a little bit more work. Okay. In that case, I don't know. You could have a timeline that has both animations and stop midway and then reverse. I don't know. There's maybe more, but maybe it's just because of the example, which is a simple one.
Okay, thank you.
No worries. Hi.
Can you speak to any performance overhead with timeline use, garbage collection, any issues like that?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, more or less it's up to you in the sense that when you code, especially when you code custom tracks, it's up to what you're doing in the code. So as I code the custom tracks, I was careful not to, to allocate stuff every frame, or I was recycling a lot and creating static references and stuff. Because, yeah, when you create custom tracks, of course, you have no control over the default ones. But we are obviously trying to make them as performant as possible and try, again, to avoid allocation and stuff like that. In general, some tracks are as simple as, for example, the audio track, right? It's just as simple as just saying to that audio source, just play. So there's not much more happening behind the scenes rather than just playing a sound on an audio source. Other tracks do a little bit more work.
Is there specific overhead in the director for updates when it's tracking that stuff, or?
Say again?
Any specific overhead, like in the audio example, like the director's doing something in the background, tracking that to send that over, right?
No, not really.
Okay.
Not that I know. And again, it's our priority to not have that.
Sure. Awesome, thanks.
No worries.
Yeah, quick question. In your in your nonlinear timelines, and even in your timelines when you're stopping and holding, you've got a looping audio track. What's stopping the soundtrack from getting chopped up?
Good point. Because I made this thing this morning, so I was like, it doesn't work. So the trick I used is, no, because that's a good point. I mean, timeline has a playhead, right? And as the playhead moves, if I stop it, everything stops. But not everything will stop. So if I look at you mentioned the first one, the dialogue, right? Which is this one that has the dialogues going on. So here I stop the thing. The audio is here. You might have noticed that this is not an audio track. It's a control track. So if I were to add an audio track, let's try. I'll add an audio track. I'll put it here. And I think, whoops, the thing is here. So I'll connect this thing to the audio track. No. Confused. Ah, no, this is another thing. Okay, never mind. If I had a clip here, and then I mute the one I created before. So now it's a proper audio track, and if I press play, it will play, and then as the playhead arrives here, we're hearing the other one.
Right.
But it stopped. And then as I resume, it stops again. So that's what you said. So this is the case if I'm using a proper audio track. So my trick was, instead of using the audio track, which would stop, I'm going to delete it now, I used a control track, which is a track that allows me to control another object. But in controlling the other object, which is this soundtrack object here, which is here, it's just another timeline, I'm not controlling its time. So in the clip of the control track, I unticked this control playable director. Because if I did tick this, then the inside timeline with the audio will stop. If I don't control it, then I'm just activating it and just letting it go. And then the inside timeline will keep playing, even if the farther timeline has stopped. So this whole timeline with the dialogues will stop, but the timeline that's inside here, which is this one, with just the audio track, it won't. So I decoupled, the playback of both. But as soon as this outmost cutscene is over, because this control track has an end, the inside track with the audio will also stop because it's deactivated completely. So as soon as the cutscene is over, the audio stops. But in between, if I pause, it doesn't.
Cool.
Is it clear?
Yeah.
It's a bit convoluted, but
No.
okay.
Thank
Cool.
you.
If you wanted to then fade out the music at the end of that, would you then need a slightly more involved setup?
Yeah, I mean, you will need. You could do several things. One thing you could do is you go inside the inmost timeline and produce the fading. But of course, you don't know the time, right? So one thing you could do is you could go into the outside timeline and maybe animate the volume. I think I've done it, actually. I've done it with the rain. So if I go to the rain timeline, I use the same trick. And here in the rain, you see there's no, it's here. It's together with the particle system. So with the particle system, I animate the emission, and it starts raining. At the same time, the particle system has an audio source with the rain effect, which is playing from the beginning, and I animate, together with the emission rate, the volume of the audio source. So it starts raining, and you start hearing more rain. And then as you're in the middle part, and even if you wrap, nothing happens, like the sound doesn't wrap back. And then when you go into the outro, you see here, it stops raining, and the audio also, you see if I go to the curves, this is the volume curve. The yellow one is very short compared to the particles one, but it's, yeah, they're doing the same thing together with the same timing. So then I can control the audio in the inside track from the outside composition. Let's call it composition, which is a After Effects terminology. Cool. Let's go do left and right.
Thanks. So I noticed that when you moved an animated character into the timeline,
Yeah.
The animator component was completely overridden by the timeline.
Yes.
Is there a best practices to getting timeline to allow like idles or locomotion blend suites or the sort of like more complicated animation setup that you have in an animator to interact with the clips on a timeline? Can you get both to run at the same time, or is it always all timeline, all animator?
It's, I mean, the timeline will take over, I would say. So if I go back to the Storm, which one is the flashback, right? The flashback has the character saying some stuff, and then here, the character Andy, named after another Unity Evangelist, he plays this attack animation. And he plays the attack animation when he calls the other character just to do this. Hey. So he plays the attack animation, and then he blends into the idle again. So what I mean is, at this point, timeline has taken over completely. I don't know of a way to have timeline take over like just halfway. One way you could do is you could use, I guess, avatar masks. So you have timeline taking control, for example, of the bust, and the legs are still controlled by the animator, I guess. So you're playing an animation only on some bones and not on others. But you can't really play an animation 0.5 and then the other 0.5 is animator. You can do it when you blend in, like here, you see at the end of this clip, I'm blending out. So there's the idle spear, and then I blend out into the animator. But you can just do it for the blend. You can define the curve even. If you go in here, you go to manual, you can select the curve of that blending. But you can't really stay, I don't think you can stay on 0.5.
Yes, and the animator is only is running as long as there's not an active clip in the timeline.
Yeah,
that it's
yeah,
taken
basically,
over.
yes.
Okay, nice.
So timeline takes control, and then it leaves control back to the animator. And I think if you select a clip here, you can also choose, you see post-extrapolate, you can choose what it does. So if you do nothing, and then you give control back, or if you keep the pose, or if you loop the pose, so it plays the animation again, and stuff like that.
Great.
Actually, this might, where is the, there was a guy that asked a question about reversing clips before. This might do the thing, ping pong. Anyway, cool. Sorry.
This is kind of related to performance again. You mentioned that there's not much overhead with the timeline, but a lot of it depends on, I guess, the custom behavior scripts. Is there a way to, because as the timeline is going, if a script is about to run, there might be some stuff that needs to be instantiated or set up. Is there a way to preload or pre-instantiate any of these custom behaviors like at the beginning? Let's say it's a fighting game and you have one timeline that does everything, and you want to set everything up so that you just play when you have to and you don't have to do anything.
Yeah, so the way I see, the way I can explain what timeline does is timeline, so timeline is based on the playable API. The playable API is the same the API that powers the animator. And what they do is when you press play and when the timeline starts, there's a moment when timeline allocates and creates all these clips, and it transforms them into these playables. And then when they're playables, the state machine of timeline will be able to play them. And that thing happens all at the beginning, which is why I do the dictionary trick when I scan the clips and I say, you're a marker, you're a marker, you're a marker, and I create the dictionary. I create all of that in the beginning, because that's when timeline scans the clips and it transforms it into playables. And that's when I want to create the dictionary. So I create the dictionary at the beginning. So yeah, all the scripts, allocations, and all the, any variable and any binding that becomes like a reference to an object, they're all allocated at the beginning. Another thing the timeline does, which is visible in this storm timeline, if you see the, these two cameras. If you see the random flashes here that I have on the timeline, short storm. Actually, they're not visible in edit mode, but they are here on these clips. Each one of them is a control clip, and it spawns a prefab into this parent object. And all this spawning happens at the beginning. So if I press play and I pause, you see here storm timeline, and then I have these spawners, right, which are the places where the lightning strikes will appear. They all contain the particle system already pre-spawned and just ready to start. So if I press this, then I see them being activated, and I see lightning flashes here and there.
Now, if you have a lot of particles in there, so one of the tricks that we do is we disable the particle until we need it. Can you do the same thing with timeline? I guess it doesn't matter. I guess you can write it in your own script too.
You can write your own script, but it does it for you. So if I, for example, the rain, well, the rain I do it actually. I have this activation track. So the rain particle system, because I animate the emission, is technically always playing, right? I'm just emitting 0. So what I did, I added another track, which is an activation track, and it just says, like, from here on, you're active. You can actually see, well, you can see both the object here, which is inactive, and then it becomes active, you see? And the above track, which is trying to animate the rain, when it's inactive, it has a warning sign. It goes like, wait, it's inactive, and then it's active, okay, and then it animates the emission. And then here, just after the ending, it disables it again. So it leaves it disabled.
Thank you.
Hi. Thanks for the question. Hi.
So you mentioned that you could assign the bindings at runtime. Can you also change clip parameters at runtime? Yeah, definitely. I mean, the clips, if you, oh, you mean from outside? Yeah, you can do that, yeah. Is there any existing example code of doing that in any of the example projects?
No.
Okay.
No. And the example projects are not there. Like, we need more examples. You mean the one that I mentioned on the default playables that I mentioned on the asset store?
Yeah, or this project.
No, there's none. But this project, I will put it online, and maybe it's a good thing to add.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Thank you.
Follow on to one of the previous questions about optimization. When the gentleman was asking before about the performance hit for creating all the instantiations at startup, could you use embedded timelines to have a timeline that does part of your intensive work at its startup and then basically embeds another timeline and at its startup instantiate more work?
I see what you mean. So you want to pre-warm some timelines that are played afterwards?
So
by like embedding them into a timeline that's played at the beginning.
Right, like so your lightning strikes, say they were really intense, you had millions of them. Instead of instantiate them inside your whole timeline, nest it inside a secondary timeline, and when that timeline gets activated by the primary one, would that be the time that the secondary timeline gets instantiated, or does the nesting basically automatically build one complex timeline out of all the nested timelines?
I don't really know, but I think in the case you mentioned, it might be as simple as decoupling like those timelines and just putting a simple script that plays them and stops them, you know, like. Sorry, the timelines actually, because if you select a timeline, if you select an object that has a playable director, you see here it has play on awake. Now play on awake of course means that if I press play here, this game object is awakened and then the timeline is played automatically. If I untick this, then I need to play it via code. So I was thinking maybe you can do something like, let me see if I press play. No. So now this timeline is not doing any work, actually. Yeah. So, yeah, no, you need to manually say, do something, and then the timeline will pre-warm all its stuff, and then you can stop it straight away, and that should do the trick.
All right, thank you.
No worries. Cool. All right, any other question? No? Cool. Thank you.